Hello, everyone. Good evening, and welcome to MCP Night, the holiday special. We are absolutely thrilled to have you all here back at the Regency Ballroom. Quick show of hands, how many of you were here last time? A bunch of repeat folks. All right, well, we got a bunch of new stuff for you. Tonight's going to be a really, really special evening. In particular, thank you all for dressing up. You all look fantastic. Give yourself a hand. A very rare special thing, especially in San Francisco. You all look great. All right, here's the program for tonight. First, I'm going to kick off telling you a little bit about some of the things that we've been building at WorkOS since the last MCP night, and also talking about some of the changes that have occurred with the MCP protocol and some new changes with the community. Second, we're going to hit our lightning demos again, one of our fan favorites. 5-minute demos from folks from the MCP community having built MCP servers, showing them live here at MCP night. Then we're going to transition to a panel discussion with a bunch of really great news about the MCP community. And finally, the best part of the night, we will wrap up with an after party here, just right downstairs. Please make sure to stick around for that. We have food, drinks, and I hear a chess tournament as well. So stick around for that. All right, let's jump in and get started. So the story of WorkOS, really why we're here, is actually the story of startups, the startup playbook. How many of you work at startups or have worked at startups? Okay, like everybody, of course. It's San Francisco. So if you're building a startup, the first thing that you try to do is launch. Build your product, launch. You might launch through Hacker News, you might launch through X, friends and family, but you launch. If you're lucky, you'll get that initial product market fit. People will start sharing it through word of mouth, you'll start getting more and more users, and if you're one of kind of the chosen few, you will actually be able to monetize and grow your business here. At WorkOS, what we found is actually getting product market fit is not enough. When you grow up market, there's a whole bunch of different stuff you need to go figure out to go sell to customers. And we call this crossing the enterprise chasm when people go up market. So it's not enough just to get product market fit, you actually have to go figure out all this stuff. At WorkOS, we build a platform that helps you do that. So we worked with tons of different companies to help them take their products and bring them up market so they can turn them into real businesses. And we say that WorkOS makes your app enterprise ready. We do this through a bunch of different stuff. So you've probably used products that are powered by WorkOS. We have a whole stack. It's not just things around authentication. We'll talk about that today. But everything from authentication to integrations to logging, compliance, permissions, even blocking fraud and abuse. We found a lot of this in the AI world. There's a lot of new types of AI-based fraud and abuse. We do it all. It's a full platform. And if you haven't used WorkOS, or maybe you haven't built something that integrates with WorkOS, you've probably used a product that's powered by WorkOS today. Whether that's OpenAI's ChatGPT, Anthropic's Claude, platforms like Vercel, coding agents like Cursor, Sierra, Replit, Temporal, Ampcode, Convex, Space10, so many more in the last year. A ton of these are obviously AI products. Even though we were started before the AI wave, we find ourselves powering the AI wave. And WorkOS is really powering these enterprise features for all these AI startups. I think one of the reasons why is because these AI products grow faster and faster and faster each year. This is actually kind of an outdated slide. If you think about these older companies, the DocuSigns of the world, they grew a little bit slower to 100 million in revenue. Companies like Cursor have just explosively grown to 100 million and beyond. And these new companies that are growing today, they wouldn't even fit on the chart. They would just go straight up. WorkOS helps you do this and helps you grow up market. And what we found is that normally when people build products, kind of in the before times, in the early days of SaaS, they might take a few years to go up market to enterprise. Something like Figma or Dropbox or Slack actually was able to wait for 5, 6, 7 years before they did enterprise. Today, it's almost immediate. And these AI products need to go up market to enterprise faster and faster and faster. So this is what we've been building at WorkOS for almost 7 years. Well, what does MCP have to do with this? Well, MCP, of course, we all know, is the Model Context Protocol. So I'll walk through a little bit about what MCP is for those, any of you that just wandered in off the street and don't know what's going on. Give you a little bit of backstory before we jump in. So what is MCP? Model Context Protocol. The key word here is really context. MCP is something that's able to bring more information to the large language model applications. So if you're using something like ChatGPT or Claude, it only knows about the training data that's built into it. It only knows what OpenAI was able to gather from maybe the open web or other documents and put into the training set. It doesn't have your information. If you want to use something like that with your company, it doesn't have the context to be able to make decisions, to reason, to actually get stuff done. And that's what MCP is all about. It's about bringing additional context to the world of the LLM products and having them be able to take actions. What MCP really does is it enables AI to integrate with your app. That sounds pretty good. If AI is taking over the world, there's new AI products everywhere, and you're a developer, you certainly want your stuff plugging into this world. And MCP is the way to do it. MCP is actually a new protocol. So it's not a new app, it's not a new system in a way, it's actually a new protocol. There's a spec for it that can be implemented many, many different ways. If you're not familiar with protocols, here are a few. We love acronyms at WorkOS. Here are a few of the acronyms from many years ago. You might have heard of TCP, Transport Communication Protocol. This is actually the bedrock foundation of the internet. If you've heard of people sending packets around, those go through TCP IP, Internet Protocol. And that's this foundational thing that everything is built on top of. But if you use the browser, it's actually not directly using TCP. It uses something called HTTP. You've ever typed that into your URL? That stands for the Hypertext Transfer Protocol, and that's the protocol that browsers use. So HTTP is actually a protocol on top of the TCP protocol to allow browsers to be able to exchange information and render content. On top of that, today, when we build APIs or developers are using things, we use something called REST. This stands for Representational State Transfer. It's a way to actually structure APIs with these different types of resources that make it kind of easy for developers to compose together. This is a pattern of the web. If people have built things on top of Stripe or on top of Twilio or with the Facebook API, these are REST APIs. And finally, that brings us to MCP. Similarly, a protocol that's built now for AI and the future of agentic applications and really where AI consumer and enterprise products are going. So we've gone through many, many different protocols, and that's why this is so important. It's a new protocol for the AI era. So how does WorkOS fit into this, or what have we been doing? Well, just like how WorkOS makes your app enterprise ready for many years, we've actually found that we can make your MCP enterprise ready. And even though MCP is just, I'll talk about it in a bit, it's kind of brand new still, there's been an explosion of new products built on top of it and a huge demand within the enterprise for MCP, and that's where we fit, in between developers and the enterprise. WorkOS sits in between your product, the code that you're writing, your MCP server, and those clients, the end customers. And by sitting in the middle, we can enforce stuff around security, we can build seamless authentication so people can register and sign up and auth, and essentially create like functional modules that make it very easy to ship stuff. So you don't have to figure out the intricacies of the OAuth, I'll talk about this a little bit, the OAuth protocol for connecting things or authentication or connecting different services together. We give you these higher level components, kind of a toolbox that lets you build your product really, really, really fast. So if you're interested in building stuff in MCP, this is a really easy way to get started. Today we're actually doing this for a lot of different products. Even though we just rolled out this MCP auth earlier this year, we're already doing this for products like Composio. They have a new product called Rube, which is a kind of MCP aggregator across a bunch of different systems. If you've used that, you're using WorkOS. Hex, one of the fastest growing new data analytics platform companies. It's a really powerful tool used by data scientists. In the past, you had to learn how to write SQL. You had to like muddle around with a bunch of graphs. Now with MCP and Hex, you can just bring it into your MCP client and just chat with it and compose it together in different tools. Super powerful. And then lastly, Fast MCP. If you've seen the Fast API project, Fast MCP is like that, but for MCP, and they have a hosting layer to actually build and deploy your MCP servers. So WorkOS today already is foundational technology for all these things. And it's very exciting that just a few weeks ago, actually on November 25th to be exact, MCP turned 1. 1-year-old. First birthday, which, you know, in the AI era, I think time, it's kind of like dog years. I feel like I've aged a decade since January, but it's been an incredibly exciting year, obviously. MCP turned 1. It was actually announced just a little bit over a year ago, and has explosively grown into this amazing thing for the community. And it's continued just rocketing ahead. So as sort of an ode to this, I was thinking we could go back in time and just kind of talk about some of the the things that actually happened over the last year for MCP, just to give you some context around where MCP has come from. So go back in time, MCP is announced as really like a protocol spec in late 2024, towards the end of November in 2024. And it comes out as like a blog post from Anthropic saying, hey, we have this new idea, this crazy thing, this way to bring context to the large language models and the AI products. And back then, MCP actually wasn't for connecting remote services. It was all for local interaction. If you downloaded the Claude desktop app and you were chatting with it, MCP was actually a way for it to interface like with your Mac. Interface with the file system, do stuff locally, actually bring context from your local environment. It's a little bit wacky, because today when we think about MCP, we almost always think about what's remote MCP servers. But it was initially almost like a Linux driver, like a standard out type of interface to your application. That's where it started. But the Anthropic folks found that it was already super powerful for them to be able to build tools on top of, build new scripts, actually take all the work that they had done around making amazing models and make it extensible to all these other types of functionality. So that was late 24. Just like a few weeks later, kind of like late 24 and early into January, February, you immediately saw a bunch of these other companies jump on board. And people started saying, oh yeah, we want to put that in our thing. Or we want to start experimenting with it or start building new projects. There were open source projects that got built on top of it. I first discovered MCP by going to meetups and events like after work in San Francisco, and it felt like I was seeing demo after demo after demo of this MCP thing. It had like perfect demo market fit, but it was very, very early. It was very, very early. No one really knew what to do with it yet. There were demos of like checking the weather, a demo of like ordering pizza. People were still trying to figure out the utility of it. And so I kind of got obsessed with MCP, actually. I was like, my friend called me MC Pilled. And we at WorkOS started thinking about how we could be part of this community. Anytime there's a new protocol, there's a new foundational technology, I just can't wait to get my hands on it and get involved in it. And so that was actually a little bit later where we ran the first MCP Night. It was going to be a small event just about new AI technology and startups. We did this at the Exploratorium, and we thought we were going to get, I don't know, maybe 60, 70, 80 people to show up. We had a line down the block of 500 people. And at that point, I knew there was something up with this MCP thing, for sure. Around that same time, we saw examples of VS Code. Cursor started adding MCP. Stripe started building around it. OpenAI committed to it. And actually, there was a bunch of work around initial OAuth integrations, the OAuth 2.1 spec, for adding authentication to MCP. And that's what we demoed at the first MCP Night, was how you could use WorkOS, all the auth stuff that we had built for login, add that to MCP. It was a big gap that we were able to fill. And I think we were the first service ever to add auth to MCP. And of course, that time as well, as any new protocol or any new technology deserves, we decided to make some free swag. T-shirts are super important. It's the currency of Silicon Valley, I think, is free T-shirts. And we also launched the very first online shop where the only way to buy something was through MCP. So you had to sign in through this MCP server, and you could get a free T-shirt and send a bunch of these out to people that were able to figure it out, really, at the end of the day. MCP continued growing. That was early in the year. Springtime, more things got built. We found both by mid-25, by this year, companies like Zapier or DeepMind or GitHub were starting to build more MCP servers. Now MCP was more about the remote connection experience to other products, being able to enrich your LLM chat experience with services that you're already using. If you were using things like Linear, you could bring that context into your chat experience. You could actually have Claude go find bugs and fix them. You could have it ship code and commit stuff to GitHub. You could have it look at your Notion docs. You could have it look at your tasks in Asana, and so on and so forth. And so we did another MCP Night, and of course, we also had to make more shirts. So we continued on. This was here at the Regency. People love these shirts. We've made so many of them. And my favorite thing, in kind of like later in 2025, a few months later, there was a lot of consternation whether MCP was actually going to become a real thing or not. It was still in this hobby project thing. The ergonomics was pretty hard to set up and configure. Even, our MCP shop was still a little bit challenging to do. But I saw one thing that gave me hope more than anything. It was my friend Theo made this video saying MCP was a mistake. And anytime you get the haters, you know it's going to work. anytime something is able to attract the haters, it actually means it's reached kind of mass market appeal. People are actually willing to talk about it. So thank you, Theo, for the attention. He made some other videos. I think MCP has both been a mistake and an incredible thing, and then back to a mistake again. I knew it was going to be a big thing at this point. So this is just a few months ago. Today now, kind of almost wrapping up 2015, MCP is the standard across AI platforms. It is one of the few places of collaboration across companies like OpenAI and Anthropic, across companies like Google and Microsoft, and countless startups that are all building for the MCP world. And sort of us, through throwing these parties, we have found ourselves in the middle of it, building things for developers, but also bringing this community together. People kind of talk about MCP as being this ultimate connector. But I think there's a question here like, what's actually driving the rapid growth of this? This is weird. If you think about those graphs earlier of OpenAI, DocuSign, OpenAI, and Cursor, the MCP growth graph is pretty incredible. It's about to raise a Series A if it was a company or something. And I think the reason why is because MCP is this universal connector. People describe it as like USB-C for AI. You don't have to fiddle with different protocols. You don't have to go figure out different things. It's extremely flexible. It's really adaptive. It has a lot of functionality built into it. You can do a ton of crazy stuff with it. And there's a lot of new things that have been put into the protocol over time. Ultimately, going back to what I was saying earlier, MCP brings that context to AI applications, the context into the LLMs. Despite the models getting better and better at reasoning and decision-making and planning and execution, if you don't have the context and if they don't have the ability to call tools, they can't really do much. It might be able to write a haiku, but it can't actually help you analyze last month's financial results. It might be able to help you proofread an essay if you paste it in, but not maybe analyze 10,000 customer support requests and figure out what's the most important thing for your team to do next month. So MCP brought all this context in, and I think it's become actually an essential component of making AI really into what it is today and powerful. MCP kind of echoes some stuff around HTTP or SQL. I was mentioning earlier the HTTP spec. By building HTTP and having it be an open standard, it was actually something that allowed us to have multiple browsers out there, not a single browser. And SQL, for those database heads of those in the world here, yeah, there's a few DBAs here, love it. SQL is kind of like that. It's this universal language. There's slight differences between things like MySQL and Postgres and other systems, but it really is this universal way of data representation and abstraction. Before SQL, every database company had their own weird proprietary protocol. You had to build specifically to one. As soon as we built these universal layers in, you could have proliferation of new clients on top. That's why, in the HTTP sense, we have Firefox, and then Chrome, and Safari, and new browsers. In the database world, we have that with obviously more database drivers and systems. And I think the same is true with MCP. It's this universal connector that's going to help us with both bringing context into the LLMs, but also allowing more things to get built on top of them. So, sounds great, right? Totally rosy, world is perfect. Well, there was a blog post, I mentioned this at the last MCP night. I think it still is true. There's this great blog post where the title was, "The S in MCP stands for security." And it's very, very much true, especially early on. I remember early at some of the meetups I went to and some of the demos I saw, just the problem around authenticating users into MCP. I would ask people that were working on MCP or people at Anthropic or people at OpenAI, like, what's our plan for this? And people were like, oh, we'll figure it out. Well, that's kind of a tough place to be if you're trying to build really business software on top of it, right? Line of business stuff. Like what I mentioned around context, the context being so valuable and so powerful, that context can be sensitive data. It's not just like the weather or something. It's your sensitive data, maybe your personal data or your company data. So the security story here is actually really, really important for this to be successful. If we're going to build new applications, new services on top of it, we got to fix the security stuff. And back here at MCP Night 2.0, I remember I had a conversation with the OpenAI and Anthropic folks, and we didn't really have any clear answer for it. There's been bumps along the way. In September, there was this huge issue where there was actually an open source package that was masquerading as an MCP server, and it just like stole credentials. But because there's so much enthusiasm around MCP and this eagerness to try stuff and be like, yeah, I'll try it and run it, it had this negative consequence, right? This kind of disastrous effect. There's this malicious package. Obviously, we were able to fix it and identify it pretty fast, but what I'm really excited is that of all the things I'm going to talk about this new in MCP, one of the biggest areas that the MCP kind of steering committee, the open source community, and the major AI labs have worked on since the last MCP night is actually this focus around security. There's been a big focus on things like stability, the security, and the extensibility. So not adding things to the direct protocol itself, but allowing people to actually extend it, expand upon it, creating surfaces and roads for new experimentation. So this has been a really fantastic focus. Now, it's not just this. There's a lot of new stuff. If you have a day job or any job at all, it's hard to stay on top of this. Being on the GitHub, the Discord, the conversations, it's not just Anthropic building this stuff. It is a thriving community of everything from tinkerers to people working at the big AI companies driving stuff forward. I honestly have never seen any open source project this young with this level of collaboration across companies. It is outstanding. So that's probably the strongest sign for MCP going forward, plus all the security stuff. Okay, well, rather than going through all of this, because we would be here all night, which would be fun, but I'm just going to call out 6 new things that have shipped since the last MCP night to give you guys a whirlwind update for those of you that haven't been reading all the pull requests and living in the Discord. All right, let's jump in. So first, client ID metadata documents. Woo! I've always wanted to say something like that on stage and get an applause. Thank you so much. Okay, what does this mean? This is such a mouthful. Well, really what this is about authentication. What I talked about in the first MCP night many, feels like years ago, was the OAuth 2.1 spec, which had something called dynamic client registration, which is actually how servers connected. And in the previous world, there was this approach where these services would have to dynamically register, kind of keep track of all their auth state, and really it was just a huge mess. It was a hard thing to integrate, it was a hard thing to build. It's something that's actually been in the OAuth spec for a while. It's a standard, it wasn't new, but the adaptation to MCP was actually really clunky, and existing OAuth systems weren't prepared to handle this. It's why we were able to build something that actually worked on top of it. But for a lot of developers, this was really hard to understand. This new world of the client ID metadata actually allows the actual applications themselves to sort of present this like URL as their ID. It's almost like kind of like a home address that they can share. And that URL actually points to a JSON object that describes all these OAuth details. It has the name of it, it has some metadata about it, it's the metadata document. The end result here is it's a lot easier to implement. This client ID metadata documents, CIMD, you'll see out there, that acronym, it's really a simplified auth solution. It replaces dynamic client registration, which was too heavy. It presents this URL as JSON, and it's dramatically easier to implement. So if you don't want to use something like WorkOS for auth or another open source package, you want to roll it yourself, it's a lot easier to do and manage. This is supported today also in WorkOS AuthKit, so both can live together. If you're interested, plug this in. It's one of the fastest ways to do it. I think we'll see a demo of it a little bit later. So that's CIMD. Second, rich interactive UIs. Interactive UIs. Yeah. All right, so one of the early problems with these AI products, you think it's the future, you think it's going to change everything, and then you open up ChatGPT, and it's like a wall of text. It feels like we've gone back in time to like old terminals, like we forgot about graphics and images, and God forbid, buttons, right? At MCP Night last time, 2.0, you saw a demo of the MCP UI project, which was this kind of crazy thing that these two guys had been working on to bring interactive experiences into MCP, for the MCP server to return interactive kind of micro applications. The way this works is you would be chatting with MCP, or chatting with your LM, and if this has an MCP UI in the background, it would actually present UI components. So not just text being like, hey, here are the flights, but actually fully interactive elements that you can click, that can take you different places, that can take actions. This is super powerful, right? This is actually presented as part of an extension. And the idea here is this is like standardizes this UI support. So it's not part of actually the mainline MCP system. It's actually an extension that can be added on. And this is a new thing I'll talk about a little bit as well. This kind of governance model of the extension layer is going to allow us to continue experimenting with MCP while the core protocol gets a lot more stable. So pretty powerful here. You could have this UI. And you could just click one of these things and actually take an action, right? You could click a link and have it open up in a certain way. So rich interactive UIs. These LLMs that had only been text until now you get UI built on a lot of the work of that MCP UI project that was demoed here just a few months ago. This apps extension, this is the extension number if you want to go plug it into GitHub and go look at this stuff. And the result is that MCP servers can present these kind of micro app experiences, these interactive ways to work with AI services. So if you have a service that you actually want to not just expose the context or the data or but maybe some actions that people can take on top of the LM, go check this out. It's really, really, really cool. It feels like a new web programming modality. All right, that's the rich interactive UIs. Third, async and long-running operations. See if I get an applause for that one, too. This is the dense part of the program. What does this mean? It's another mouthful. Well, the way MCP, really these LLM apps have worked in the past, and when you connected an MCP server, it's request response. You type something in, it says, okay, I'm looking at the tools, I'm trying to do something. Can I call this tool? I'll call this tool right now. But what if the tool you're calling isn't going to return immediately? What if it's actually an asynchronous task? And you might be wondering, what is an asynchronous task? Well, what if it's generating some artifact? What if it wants to go generate a video or some audio or an image for you? What if it's running your test suite, right? What if you want this task to go do something that's going to take an hour? Or what if you actually wanted to run something for a long period of time, maybe even multiple days, like a full compliance check around your business? The representation of these tasks, it was not something you could do in MCP previously. It was just this call and response. You had to still keep the client connected and have it open. So this is a really, really, really powerful new thing for MCP. It kind of seems obvious that you would want to call something out and have it, spool back whenever it's finished. But this idea of long-running operations is going to expand MCP into many, many different type of workloads, especially ones where the MCP server can't immediately return the data. It takes this synchronous-only request-response cycle and actually makes it something that can create these long operations. What actually happens is it returns immediately. So you say this certain thing, you're like, I need this task to run, or I need this test to run, and it returns immediately, but then checks and pulls for those updates later. So you can close your laptop, reopen it, and it'll keep checking in. Pretty cool. This really enables this multi-minute workflows, I can close it for a few minutes or go away and come back, but also multiple hours. And that's where agents are going. Agents are really about going and doing things, not just writing code for you, but maybe doing a bunch of research, and then submitting something, and then doing something else, and then doing something else. These multi-step, multi-hour workflows. The models are getting so good. This is one of the tests they actually build is how long can the model run by continuing to make good decisions. You can actually do this with now these long-running operations. And because it's an MCP, you can control it through MCP. So I think this unlocks a ton in terms of agentic workflows. I think it's going to be an enormous thing for agents and MCP coming together. All right, so that's 3. We're only halfway there. 4, security and enterprise controls. I mentioned this a little bit, yeah. Attaboy, there we go. All right, well, what does this mean? Well, the enterprise story previously was kind of a mess. Everything was very disjoint. Like I said, the auth story was I don't know. Now we have a ton of stuff figured out. Right? Security, extensibility, actual permissions on top. There's things for new tool calling. A few of them here I just want to talk about. There's a lot of stuff in this. I kind of put it in one section, but there's an enormous amount of stuff here in terms of how people have brought the security story forward. First, new in MCP, you can have default permission scopes for tools. That also sounds like a mouthful. It's a huge change. It's a huge, huge change to actually have permissions for tool calling. Second, you can have these extensions for authorization. And what I mean by that is there's the ability to layer new things in the MCP spec for advanced permissions that you might need inside of your application or your client, your MCP server. One of these is the client credentials flow, machine to machine. Previously, MCP was all about the client, the end user, working with it and connecting to the server. But what I mentioned around the long-running transactions, that type of thing, you can actually use MCP for two machines to talk to each other, for agents to talk to other agents. It can be this unified ultimate agent authentication protocol. And this is actually the way to do the authentication inside of that. So we're seeing this like progressive tooling unlock for these new use cases. We also have the cross-app access project, which is this whole thing around actually connecting your MCP server to just a single identity system and that being able to give you a lot of access to other things. So imagine your user just connecting at their workplace, just connecting their company ID to your MCP client, but then you have access to Notion and Linear and GitHub all through one system without having to connect all of them together. Super, super, super powerful new extensions that are on top of MCP. They're not necessarily part of the core MCP spec, but you can start developing with these and building on top of them, and many clients are already starting to support this. So generally, like really exciting security, but also these enterprise controls and extensibility on top. And lastly, these private enterprise MCP registries. A lot of the MCP use today is actually internally in companies. People building things on top of MCP just for their employees, just for their staff. And now you can do that through a registry. You don't have to publish it publicly. It can be a private registry. This is really, really cool. So that's fourth. Fifth, agentic tool using servers. I wonder what that means. Well, have any of you seen sampling? Do you know about the MCP focus for sampling? Yeah, a handful of sampling fans out there. All right. So sampling is kind of a way for the tool calls to sort of like work in reverse. It allows actually the MCP server to send stuff back to the client that would get run. Maybe inference, maybe some things that can pull up the context. But actually, this is a new way, sort of through sampling. It's an extension to sampling where it's not just running a little bit inference. It can actually call tools. It can kind of call the other direction. And it's a little bit hard to kind of wrap your head around this. You're like, why would I want to call tools the other direction? But really, the story here is that in the past, all the tool calling was one direction. Your MCP client, so you're using Claude or ChatGPT or something like that, it's orchestrating all of the tools. It itself is trying to figure out how to reason about all these different things together. It's the brain, right? And you're essentially just giving it a toolbox of things to do stuff with. But sometimes Claude doesn't actually know what you're trying to accomplish. It's not a specialist. It doesn't actually know how to reason about some very specific type of task or kind of workflow that you're trying to do. And that's what this is about. Through this kind of tool use from servers, you can actually have an MCP server that kind of pushes back into the client. Here's the tools that you should go call. You can actually have the MCP server sort of act as like a sub-agent, or actually like a planning resource to go back in MCP. And this actually allows people to build MCP servers with their own type of logic and planning and resource management that can be incorporated into the kind of primary LLM that you're using. This is, again, really, really cool. A lot of this stuff is breaking past, I think, the normal way that people think about how MCP is going to work. Whether it's just this client to server, I just want context about all my Notion documents or my Linear tickets. This way of interacting, having this kind of bi-directional way of calling tools, incorporating information, be able to do reasoning, this is leading to this future, I think, of agents and sub-agents and agent collaboration. And this is super, super powerful. We're going to go from this world of having this mess to be able to have these agents internally be consistent and call their own tools. Sub-tool orchestration is what people call it. So this is still pretty experimental. It's an extension to the sampling thing, but it's probably one of my favorite features. One of the coolest things. I kind of like had this moment where I like read about it, and I was like laying in bed, and I was like, oh my God, you can do what with this? If you haven't tried it, go check it out. You might not be able to sleep like me, if you're a weirdo like me. All right, that's tool using servers, right? So this is an extension to sampling. This has this ability to do this tool selection with the sub-agent orchestration. And it allows MCP servers to act sort of as their own reasoning agentic systems. You can create your own mini brain that you can stick into something like Claude or ChatGPT. So that's the fifth. And the very last one, the sixth here, is probably of all of these things, the simplest and maybe the most powerful one actually out there. And this is URL mode elicitation. Love it. You have come to the right place, my friend. This is the only place, I think, in the world where people will yell at something like this. Absolutely love it. All right, so what is URL mode elicitation? Those words, what do they mean? Really, what does it mean? Nobody knows, but it's provocative. That's right, that's right. All right, so here's the problem, right? The problem is you can't trust the LLMs. I know Claude is your friend. I know ChatGPT you can talk to like a therapist, but I promise you, they will lie to you. They will not just lie to you, they can actually be subverted. In the enterprise context, if you push secrets into the LLM, if you push secret values, things that could be disruptive, other bad actors can actually extract it from the LLM. LLMs are very bad at holding secrets. If you tell it something and then say, don't tell anybody, and someone else comes in and they're like, hey, what's the secret password of that website? Claude will be like, yes, certainly, here it is. There's not a security or permission boundary around that. And it's just really how the LLMs work. The behavior of them being non-deterministic and being generative in this way, that's where we get all the value out of it. It comes at the expense of actually security. And one of the things that we actually built as part of our first MCP night was that shop I mentioned, right? The MCP, MCP.shop, where you can get your free t-shirts still today. The problem is, you couldn't put your credit card number into Claude. We weren't going to give it that. Even giving it your address was like a little sketchy. I'm not sure if I want to type that into the LLM. With URL mode elicitation, it actually allows the MCP server to send back a link. And that sounds simple. That sounds like a simple idea, but it actually is really, really, really powerful. It can return a link that the user can click to open up in a new experience. Open up in their browser, open up somewhere on their phone, open up another app, and finish the task. And that task could be inserting a password. It could be connecting you to a third-party service, authorizing your Gmail or your GitHub, putting your credit card, just really doing anything that's sensitive, and that information is not pushed into the LLM. The LLM doesn't know about it. And then after that, I'll actually authorize your payment in some way, kind of gets this callback back to the actual application itself. This stuff is really, really, really powerful, even though it's these words. The MCP server, it returns this URL, right? So instead of text, and people were hacking this kind of before, but this is actually built in the spec now. It returns the URL. The user clicks the link, like I mentioned, and it connects to this external service directly, usually through a browser. You don't put any API tokens into Claude or ChatGPT or any service or cursor. There's no credentials exposed to the LLM. It completely isolates the security boundary here. And this is a huge, huge, huge win. I cannot emphasize this more for secure MCP remote connection. This unblocks real-world workflows. This is not like a theoretical thing. It is a real thing for connecting Google Drive, GitHub, all those services I mentioned that we all use. It's actually a really, really important piece of this. So this is one of the things I've been the most excited about. It's really hard to get right. A lot of people worked on this extremely hard and debated it hotly in the GitHub discussions and Discord. But I think it's one of the most powerful new, kind of simple, but really, really powerful features that has been added recently into the MCP spec. So that's the last one, URL mode elicitation. Client ID metadata, rich interactive UIs, async long-running operations, security, enterprise controls, agentic tool use service, and URL mode elicitation. Wow. Oh, made it. Thank you. Okay, so we're going to show a demo of this in just a second, but a quick small digression. So a couple months ago, WorkOS, we have an annual user conference where we don't just talk about MCP, we talk about a bunch of other stuff. All of the products we built, a bunch of customers, all this enterprise-ready stuff. We call it Enterprise Ready Conference, and it was over at the SF Jazz Center. As part of that, we showed off a new product we have called WorkOS Pipes. And we are not becoming plumbers. This is actually a software service for you. And what it does is it helps you connect stuff together. If you're a developer and you've ever built an application, you realize that it gets a lot more valuable when people bring their own data into it. If you want to build something that's actually useful to people, you got to bring their context into it. So in the previous world of software engineering, this might be connecting to Facebook or connecting to GitHub or something like that. And it's actually a pain to write all those integrations. If you're a developer, you have to build individual integrations for every service. You have to register for them. They have different formats. You have to keep track of tokens. It's just a mess. This is code that nobody wants to write. And actually, the vibe coding applications, they're not very good at doing this too. It's very, very detail-driven. If it goes wrong, it's like catastrophic, right? Because all of these are security vulnerabilities, potentially, for your end user's data. So it's really, really important to get right. it's really stuff around authentication and authorization. Sounds like a WorkOS thing. So we built this thing called Pipes that actually connects into this, and it's this layer that sits in between. It's this layer that actually allows you as a developer to really quickly integrate your product with these third-party services. Now, we built this in a way that has nothing to do with MCP. If you are writing software like a Neanderthal, typing instead of prompting, if you are just handcrafted, small batch, lovingly created Ruby on Rails apps or whatever, this is a great fit. You can build stuff with it really, really fast. But also, what we found is it's actually a perfect fit for building MCP servers, because MCP servers need to connect to all your stuff, right? You need to bring that context in I was talking about, and the connecting is a big piece of it. And so we actually cooked up a pretty cool demo of this, of WorkOS Pipes, this new product we have, plus what I just mentioned last around that URL elicitation feature. And in true MCP Night fashion, we are going to kick off our very first live demo of the night. So please welcome Garrett from WorkOS for our first demo of Pipes plus MCP.
Thank you, Michael. All right, so I'm a product manager, and I need to do a lot of things in terms of how our projects are on track, but the worst part of everyone's job is scheduling meetings. So I cooked up a little, not small batch handcrafted, but a LLM-generated MCP server to help me with that task. It's a little scheduler. So here we have our configuration in VS Code, and we're going to use Pipes along with elicitation in order to access these systems that I need, like Linear and Google Calendar, so I can do my job more efficiently. Integrating Pipes into either an MCP server or an application is really, really simple. There's basically two things you need to do. First is you need to get authorization URLs. This is the URL that you send a user to so that they can authenticate access to their account. In this case, it would be Linear. All you do is make one request to the WorkOS API, you get that URL for the user, send them on their way, you're good to go. Once they've authenticated, then you need to get a token. This is how you actually access the Linear API in this case on that user's behalf. Again, with Pipes, it's really simple. One API call, and we'll get you a token. If you're familiar with the OAuth spec, you know that there's refresh tokens, access tokens, they have different lifetimes. There's all this complexity about managing the state around this. We take care of all of that for you. Every time you hit this API, we'll hand you a new refresh token. So in order to show this, we're going to do a little thing with our MCP server. So can you tell me who has been working on the Pipes project in Linear? So the LLM is going to go and look up this tool call that we have. It's going to run this little search. I'm going to allow that. I'm going to re-authenticate the server because it's been a minute. So now we get this elicitation call. In order for it to access Linear on my behalf, I need to grant it access. So we're going to click this, get another little warning, blind you with a white screen. Fortunately, Linear doesn't have dark mode for their consent screen. Obviously, I'm going to authorize access to Linear on the application's behalf, and then basically say, OK, proceed. At this point now, my MCP server is able to get an access token to impersonate as me in order to query and tell me, oh, Dan, myself, and Alex have been working on this project. Great. Can you find some time for us to review for post-launch? So again here, the MCP server is going to do another tool call to this free busy tool that we've created. It's going to take all these emails. In this case, it needs to look at my calendar. Again, with elicitation, it can prompt me, hey, you need to go authorize this service. So I'm going to give it access to my Google account. WorkOS can have it. That's totally fine. Another flashbang. Respond. And now it has an access token to my Google Calendar. And great, it looks like there's some various times most of this week. Oh, Alex is pretty busy. Yeah, he often is. Great. Why don't we meet, Tuesday, 9:30? Can you schedule that? Again, now since I've already authorized Google Calendar access, this can just do the tool call, and you won't see that elicitation again because it already has the access token. The MCP server can go and perform this task, schedule it. Here we get this calendar invite. But yeah, that's Pipes. That's how easy it is to integrate third-party applications into your product.
One more round of applause, kicking off the live demos. Actually live. So what you saw was a demo of WorkOS Pipes through MCP, through that URL elicitation feature. Through Pipes, you can connect any data source that your customers use. You can connect Salesforce, Slack, Intercom, GitHub, Linear, whatever, Google Calendar. You can connect all this stuff together. It could either be through MCP or it could be through just your regular application code that you're writing. What was not demoed here is we actually have drop-in UI widgets and these pre-built integrations for your service. So there's like very little code to write actually to get an experience like this. If you're looking to build new kind of expressive services with these third-party connectors, Pipes we think is the fastest way to do it. And all the stuff that I mentioned earlier, it's really built on top of this kind of secure OAuth token management. It's built on top of another product we have called WorkOS Vault, which is an encryption key service that uses these hardened enterprise-grade keys under the hood. So everything is like fully secure, fully managed. It's fully bulletproof. It's really awesome. So if you're interested in that, come chat with us. We'd love to roll it out with you. So all of this brings us to today. And there's some very exciting news that we were going to announce at MCP Night, but it got scooped by some reporters yesterday. And that's that Anthropic has actually donated MCP to the Linux Foundation. In addition to this, Block is also donating codename Goose to the Linux Foundation. Which, if you haven't used codename Goose, it's this incredible open source MCP client. Most of the things out there are closed source. This one's fully open source, and it's fantastic. It's a great experience. And then, of course, not to be outdone, Agents MD, which is this like amazingly simple but super important piece of the ecosystem too, around describing how agents work. OpenAI has donated this to the Linux Foundation too. All three of these projects have moved from being really run by these companies, with open source community support, transitioning into actually sort of the public stewardship of this organization. And if you're not familiar with the Linux Foundation, I'll give you a hint. They're the ones behind Linux, which has been a really successful project and has done really, really well over the last few years. So this is such a huge leap forward, I think, for MCP in the community. I know this is something a lot of people have been working extremely, extremely hard on, and it's very cool to have this happen just a little bit after the 1-year birthday of this protocol. All of this has been done through a new group from the Linux Foundation called the Agentic AI Foundation. So this is a group through multiple different companies that are supporting this work, donating projects in this sense, open source projects, but also time, energy, engineering work, and actually a significant amount of funds to fund this going forward. The Linux Foundation is funded by donors, by companies putting money behind this. And we're really thrilled that it's not just these three that have joined it. Google, Microsoft, AWS are also part of this, Cloudflare, Bloomberg, and actually WorkOS is part of this too, and many other companies. So we're really, really excited about this new organization that will really be the home for MCP and these other projects going forward. It's kind of like a new day one for MCP. MCP is like at its first birthday, but it feels like we're kind of in this transition moment when we're really just getting started. So even though this is the third MCP night we've done this year, we're getting close to the holidays, it's winter outside, it almost feels like we're just kind of starting to cook. We're just starting to get started. So I really couldn't be more excited about this transition, these new kind of governance structure around MCP and where we're going to take it. And as a very, very special treat today, after we go through some of these lightning demos I'll just talk about in a very minute, the panel of discussion that we actually are going to have here is with some of these people from this foundation and these groups. We have David from Anthropic here, who's the creator of MCP, co-creator of MCP. We also have Nick Cooper, who's on the core committee at OpenAI, the MCP core committee, but working at OpenAI and MCP. Jim Zemlin, who's the executive director, actually at the Linux Foundation. Manik from Block, and also I'll be moderating that. We're going to do that right after the demos. So this is a very, very special moment to kind of talk about this transition that's occurring in the market. All right. Well, before we get to all that, my favorite part of the MCP Night program is actually seeing new stuff. new things that people have built, things that people have been working on for the first time. One of my favorite things about the ecosystem in San Francisco is the demo culture, people coming and showing off stuff. And this might be a little bit more elevated than the typical like pizza and beer and ripped jeans in someone's office, after work, but we're gonna do it anyway, because MCP is all about demos and the tech community is all about demos. So here are the lightning demos we have coming at you tonight. For the very first one, please put your hands together and welcome Craig, who's head of DevRel and marketing at Supabase, to talk about Supabase MCP.